Early March 1944, high over Germany, a single P-51 drops its tanks and bites into a dive as 9 FW-190s roll in on a bomber box. The German frequency crackles and spikes. Abort, abort, he's too fast, as contrails tear into broken lines above the formation. Inside the Mustang, a 19-year-old grips the stick, chin set, oxygen mask tight, eyes fixed on the tail-end fighter. He has no wingman, no safety net, and one rule in his head: one pass, then out. Stay with this, and you'll see how a rookie at Debden turned altitude, timing, and cold discipline into 5 kills and an open runway home. If cockpit-level World War II stories are your thing, hit subscribe and strap in. We're going straight from briefing room to gun sight. Debden had been a hard posting long before he arrived. The 4th Fighter Group, built from former Eagle Squadron veterans, had flown under Eichhut Fighter Command since 1942 and carried itself like a unit that already knew the cost. By late February, Operation Argument had hammered the German aircraft industry, and the Luftwaffe answered with teeth. March opened with deep raids, even to Berlin, and the escorts stretched farther than ever. The 4th had just swapped its burly P-47s for the P-51BC, trading weight for legs. With drop tanks, the Mustang could run a long ribbon of air out to the heart of Germany and still fight. Veterans at Debden carried names that floated around the mess like weather. Men who had flown with the RAF, men with tallies and scars. A 19-year-old replacement did not draw reverence. Second Lieutenant Charles McGorrell stepped onto that flight line, slim and pale, a kid with a training smile and a quiet voice. He'd grown up around small fields and hangar talk, but none of that earned points in a ready room full of proven killers. He said little, listened hard, and nodded at the right places. The ground crews glanced at his face and exhaled their doubts, then went back to safety wires and panels. On his first morning, he strapped into a P-51 with fresh paint and a sheen of condensed breath on the canopy. The mission called for deep escort, and the weather offered thin cloud and long visibility. His leader, an experienced hand with a string of claims, took off ahead, checked in crisp, and led the element toward the coast. The climb was routine: oxygen on, guns armed, drop tanks feeding. Somewhere over the continent, the leader's engine told a new story. Temperature climbed, oil pressure dipped, and the call came. He was aborting and descending. Standard procedure was clear. The wingman either stayed glued to the crippled lead or rejoined another friendly element. Radio traffic stacked in layers, and directional vectors glared from the board. Messages crossed and overlapped. Then a break of static erased his rejoin cue. He called once, twice, heard nothing useful, and stared at the bomber contrails ahead. Turning around would mean empty sky for the formation that expected him. He pushed the throttle to METO, checked fuel states, and held course for the rendezvous. Escort work in early 1944 was a math problem that punished hesitation. The bomber stream moved at a set speed and altitude. Fighters had to be at the right place with the right energy to stop incoming attacks. The P-51B gave pilots the tools to solve that math. At altitude, it could show about 440 miles per hour, and with external tanks, it stretched its reach into the far interior before switching to internal fuel. Its laminar wing paid dividends at speed, but it did not forgive sloppy angles. A good Mustang driver avoided sustained turning fights with German single-seaters and kept everything in the vertical. Fuel was both leash and whip. Drop tanks fed the long leg in, but most escorts jettisoned them before combat to remove drag and avoid a fire risk when the shooting started. The cockpit itself was a narrow office. Gauges rang in a semicircle. The gun sight sat steady above the panel, and 4 .50-caliber machine guns waited in the wings with limited belts and a high appetite. Gunnery was about timing and geometry, Short bursts kept barrels cool and ammunition available. Wide tracking shots wasted both and dragged a pilot into the path of the next attacker. The Luftwaffe knew the bomber stream's habits. Fu-190s, a mainstay in 1943 and early 1944, came in from high and out of the sun, or sliced across the formation at speed to avoid the defensive guns of the bombers. A 190 could roll quickly and hit hard, with its cannons shredding a wing if given a steady shot. At very high altitude, though, the Mustang's speed edge and climb made it a dangerous ghost above the fight. Escort doctrine stressed altitude advantage, stacks, and mutual support. Flights took sectors and moved like a moving fence around the heavy bombers, ready to break and slash at threats, then climb back into position. Radio discipline mattered. Short, clear calls, tally-ho, break left, cut through the mess so nobody died looking for meaning in an extra word. A single ship was a poor idea by any manual. Alone meant fewer eyes, no cover on a climbing turn, no second set of guns to deter a gaggle. But altitude could be a substitute for a wingman if you treated it like a bank account. Spend it fast to make a point, then climb back to replenish before anyone had time to trap you below. McGorrell had learned that instinctively in training, practicing yo-yos and split S reversals until the shapes of those moves lived in his hands. In combat, those moves were not choreography. They were survival. He also understood the bombers were both purpose and shield. Stay close enough to the box, and German fighters had to mind heavy guns on their approach. Stray too far, and you fought the gaggle on their terms. Across the front glass of his Mustang, contrails ran like scraped chalk. Beyond them, the dull flash of defensive fire showed where the heavies were taking hits. 9 dark specks slid in 2 finger-4 elements with a trailer, their paths converging on the leading bomber group. He scanned the sun angles and saw his window. With a quick glance at the fuel selector and the coolant radiator control, he flicks the drop tank release and feels the airplane shrug. The Mustang immediately picks up, clean and eager. He nudges the nose just below the horizon to trade altitude for speed, trims out the pressure, and tips into the sun line. The gun sight circle settles over the last FW-190. A 3 count to stabilize the lead, then a short squeeze. The 50s speak in a dry hammer rhythm, and the 190's tail hammers sideways as a wing roots out smoke. The German pilot throws the stick and rolls, but the hit is fatal. The fighter unloads and drops, venting black, passing beneath the box as crewmen in the bombers watch it fall. Up front, the lead element snaps defensive. One 190 breaks toward him and overshoots, cutting across his canopy with a flash of Balkenkreuz and a strobe of tracer. He refuses the turn. Instead, he unloads to keep speed, drags a shallow arc past the bomber's tail, and pitches up into a high yo-yo, watching the overshooter blow through and present his belly. The sight picture fills fast. He taps one more burst and sees pieces flick off the fuselage of the second attacker. A sudden gout of flame licks out near the engine, cowling. The 190 begins a slow, burning roll. The radio explodes with calls in 2 languages. Somewhere out there, a clipped voice barks for a break-off, and another snarls a warning about a fast Mustang. By the time the second Focke-Wulf staggers away, he is already climbing back into his perch. The Mustang punches into thinner air again, and his altimeter unwinds back into his comfort zone. His eyes never stop moving. A third 190 sets up on the box's far side, sliding in toward a B-17 that has edged a hair out of position and looks like an easy kill. He draws a thin line across the sky in a shallow dive, aiming not at the German's tail, but at the point where the flight paths will meet. The geometry collapses like a hinge closing. He fires late, at close range, and keeps the burst under a second. The tracers stitch from wingtip to cockpit, then cut off as he banks hard away to avoid debris. Shouts filter up from below, muffled by the canopy and oxygen hiss. He glimpses the silver top of a Liberator, holding level, as the enemy fighter cartwheels past its nose. Coming out of his turn, he senses the trap forming. Two 190s working together, one bait and one hammer. The bait lingers wide and slow, a tempting target. His answer is speed again. He refuses to take the bait and instead slides into the vertical, climbing into thin air while watching the hammer slide in late and miss. That hammer tries to follow into the climb. The Mustang's legs show here. He rolls off the top and pours a tickle of rudder in, dropping the nose onto the German's high line. A quick burst rips across the Wonder 90's canopy and wing root. The aircraft spasms and falls away, leaving a thin ribbon of smoke that writes a diagonal down against the contrails. Fuel state nags at the edge of his mind. Internal tanks are burning faster now, and every climb draws from the same small well he needs to get home. He knocks his eyes down for a heartbeat to check the gauge, then is back up, pulling a shallow, high-speed turn around the box. The bombers sit like solid islands in a sea that keeps moving. Two of the remaining 190s gather for a pass from the sun line. He positions himself between them and the formation, not as a shield, but as a threat. They see his angle and adjust, but their timing is off. One slips a half-second early, the second loses nerve in the face of a head-on possibility, and wavers. He capitalizes on that beat of hesitation. A shallow dive, a snap to bring guns on, and a short punch of fire across the first one's nose persuades it to break. The second commits too late. He catches a quartering shot and clips the right wing, the 190 rolling hard to the damaged side and dropping out of the attack. German voices shout in each other's ears. "Abort! Abort!" He's too fast, leaks between bursts of static, and the gaggle begins to separate instead of pressing. He doesn't chase. Instead, he climbs again, tightening his orbit around the bomber box, and waits for anyone foolish enough to try a re-attack. One tries. It comes in shallow, dives to pick at a straggler, and exposes its tail for a moment longer than necessary. He is there with another brief shot and a clean break. The 190 belches vapor and slides under the formation, control lost. Crewmen in waist windows track it as it goes, shouting to each other over the crash of their own guns. His hands stay calm even as the adrenaline runs. He nudges the prop control back a hair to protect the engine, checks coolant temps, and resets trim for another climb. Silence arrives in ragged pieces. The sky around the box clears for the first time in minutes, and the only movement is the vast, patient line of bombers carrying on. He feels the hollowness that comes after sudden violence, the kind that leaves you dizzy and alert at the same time. The fuel gauge looks back with a hard number he cannot negotiate with. A quick calculation tells him the truth. There's enough to get clear, not enough to linger for sport, and every second now is an invitation to bad luck. He makes one final orbit to discourage any last approach, then slides off to the west, keeping height as long as the gasoline will allow. The Mustang, light now, climbs without effort. Flak bursts bloom off his left in black flowers as he crosses a belt. He angles away, breathing slow to keep the tunnel vision at bay, and watches for the ridge of cloud that marks safer air. Contact with friendlies comes back in fragments. Call signs and tallies drift in on a channel gradually less crowded, and he slides into a loose flow of returning escorts without asking permission. By the time the English coast shows under the haze, he is nursing each last drop. The engine note changes, subtle but there. So he throttles gently and starts down. Debden's grass and tarmac spread ahead with the late sun behind him. He lowers the gear, feels the drag, and flares shallow, rolling to a stop with tanks nearly dry and hands suddenly shaking. Ground crews ran to meet him as the canopy slid back and the engine ticked down. They looked into the cockpit at a kid who had just gone somewhere most people never really imagined. He climbed down without ceremony and walked toward intelligence, helmet under his arm, the smell of gunpowder still in his clothes. The gun camera canister came off the wing with care and disappeared into someone's hands. Debrief started with routine and steadied itself with details that made men sit forward. Kill claims were read back, enemy types and markings noted, and maps were marked in pencil. Gun camera film and witness statements turned the room quiet. Records vary on the exact credit tally from that day. By the time the film finished, a junior pilot had achieved what the room had not expected to see. The effect landed in two directions at once. Morale lifted among the bomber crews who heard how a single fighter had broken a gaggle, and the fourth started watching the kid with a new calculus. Procedures shifted in small but sharp ways. Flight leads emphasized vertical tactics and energy discipline in every briefing, and single-ship rejoin drills got folded into daily training. The larger theater learned again what numbers often lied about. The right airplane in the right hands erased experience gaps. Escort stacks tightened, and radios got cleaner while the war pressed on. Skill bought time. Discipline let you spend it without dying a fool. Being underestimated only worked if you knew exactly when to cash in the mistake your enemy made. For more frontline stories told from the cockpit, subscribe now so you don't miss the next mission.